Welcome, colleagues, wherever you are joining us from today. A very happy World Water Day 2022. My name is Neeta Pokhrel. I am the Chief of Water Sector Group in ADB. This year's theme for World Water Day is on groundwater, making the invisible visible. And for our Asia Pacific region, role of groundwater is central to sustainable development and healthy ecosystems of both our cities and rural areas. Up to 2/3 of agricultural water demand in many of our countries are met from groundwater, especially in Asia Pacific. And on average, 1/3 of Asia's drinking water comes from it. But unfortunately, this extensive groundwater usage is largely unregulated in our region. This, combined with lack of financing and governance structures for capital investment as well as maintenance, results in all our subsectors of water actually. Irrigation, drainage, water supply system has made our region one of the most water insecure. And we are already the most vulnerable globally when it comes to water-related disasters. And we have to add the changing climate to this equation. The latest IPCC report confirms that global warming caused by climate change will result in intensification of water cycle, which for us means increased water scarcity, more frequent and more intense floods, as well as more severe droughts. So business as usual, it's just not going to get us there in managing our depleting resources, both the invisible, our groundwater, and the visible surface water. New technologies such as digitalization, ICT, Earth observations, combined with this increased focus on climate adaptation for our sector, financing and sustainability, leveraging and getting more private financing into this will help us leapfrog to a more secure and resilient Asia Pacific. Therefore, we celebrate today the World Water Day with you through this 1 hour of deep dive into the technological tools, innovations, and how they can help us value and manage our water resources. We will also take this opportunity to launch the first of our annual interactive e-magazines, Digitalizing Water, which showcases solutions and lessons from ADB's 2 e-marketplaces that were held last year, and we plan to do them regularly. And it also features 12 ADB projects with in-depth information on innovative tools that were used on the field. We have 5 distinguished speakers with us today. If I may please ask our speakers to just put the video on as we start, starting with our keynote speaker, Ms. Annemieke Nijhof, the Managing Director of Deltaris Foundation, who will share with us global thinking, tools and technologies in managing water. We will then hear from the Director General of ADB Sustainable Development and Climate Change Department, Mr. Bruno Carrasco, on valuing water through technological innovations. We will then take a small pause and launch our new e-magazine and do a short unveiling of it, and move on to our 2 ADB colleagues, Ms. Silvia Cardascia and Mr. Jelle Beekma, who will both talk about ADB's initiatives and support in managing both the invisible and visible water resources in multiple countries that we work in. And at the end of the presentation, we will have a short round of Q&A. So please do type in your questions on the chat box during the presentations. And finally, we will wrap up with a 30-second video and closing remarks from Mr. Tom Panella, the chair of ADB's Water Sector Committee and our director in East Asia Department. So without further ado, please join me in welcoming Ms. Annemieke Nijhof, the Managing Director of Deltaris Foundation, to share her thoughts with us. Ms. Nijhof has an extremely distinguished character of almost 30 years working in various sectors of sustainability and the environment. Her experience ranges from the government to the private sector, and she was also named the top woman of the year in 2015 because of a tenacious commitment to diversity and inclusion in organizations. Over to you, Ms. Nijhof.
Well, thank you so much. It's a privilege to have the opportunity to share with you my thoughts on global thinking, tools and technologies on valuing water on this important day, the International Water Day. Please give me the next slide. I'd like to introduce myself to you based on this picture of my childhood. Here you see my parents, my elder sister and my younger brother, and I am the girl in the middle. And actually, this is where it all started, because my father was always interested in everything that happened around the world. And we had long and severe debates on the kitchen table when I was at home. And this made me, when I was a child, very aware how lucky I am that I was born in the Netherlands, in this stable family, in a time period in which women were able to do everything they wanted to do and chase for their dreams. Valuing water, actually the first association was that I was baptized as a little baby by my parents, also being influenced by the stewardship I feel for the sustainable earth and handing over the earth to the next generation in a proper way. And my mother learned me that by thinking global, there was always the neighbor who had his work during the nights, and we always had to be silent at home to make sure that we wouldn't waking up him up while he was sleeping over his work duties. So being conscious about the small things with your neighbors, but also having this global perspective is something that I was born and raised with. And actually this fuels my personal purpose, which is about sustainability and equality and justice around the world. And I translated it into two values, which are about humanity, always look for the best solutions for everyone, leave no one behind, but also humility, that we are just part of a bigger system, of the ecosystem, and that we do really have to respect the knowns and unknowns of this system we're working in. Becoming an engineer, I started to be very interested in tools and technology, because I really believe that we are able to improve societies by putting technology in the right way. And that is actually our duty, to make data, digitalization work, to close the gap, to build on sustainability and on equality. Next slide, please. So for me, my dream came through when I was appointed as the general manager of Deltaris in October 2020, because Deltaris' purpose is enabling Delta life, and in a very broad sense of way. So it's about question how deltas develop in the future, and what are the limits to the context of faster sea level rise and the change of the discharge of the river systems. How will these developments impact the living conditions? But also, how will we manage water and subsurface in a sustainable way, maintaining the capabilities, the resilience of the ecosystems, and also creating economic prosperity and food supply? How can we replace our infrastructure in an adaptive way, in such a way that it's all still functioning, but is also able to deal with the more extremes that it has to face in the future? And last but not least, how can we cope with extreme events like floods and droughts, and make sure that all the interactions between these factors can be dealt with in urbanized areas and deltas? Next slide, please. We as Deltaris study delta areas worldwide. We are an independent research institute, a public research institute funded partly by Dutch government, but not only to work in the Netherlands and to prepare ourselves in this sensitive spot on Earth, but also to learn and deal and cooperate around the world to broaden our scope and to share our knowledge outside the world. And today, on the 29th annual World Water Day, we would like to stress also, as Neeta already said, the importance on groundwater, the invisible part of our water system, but which is impact is visible everywhere. It's out of sight, out under our feet, but it's a hidden treasure. And I think it's up to us scientists to create the visibility of the system, and this is where the technology, data, and tools comes in. Because almost all of the liquid fresh water is groundwater. And as climate change gets worse, and I think the latest IPCC reports were really alarming when it comes to the developments and also the acceleration of the developments, the groundwater resources become more and more critical. And we really need to team up to sustainable this precious mine. So groundwater may be out of sight, but it should not be out of mind. And I think it's our duty to put this to the front. Next, because this is fresh water availability in coastal zones. We try to summarize everything that's going on in these areas, looking through the delta areas. But we can summarize what's going on by sinking, shrinking, and it's becoming saltier by intrusion of saline groundwater and sea level into these urbanized areas, affecting these freshwater resources we have. Next, please. So this is how we can present with the big data developments what's going on around the world and where are the stress areas. Here you see a map in which we presented the groundwater availability, the aquifers around the world. And fresh water, groundwater availability is also affected by, of course, in the first place, climate change, which is something that's going on, but it's affected by extraction. And everywhere around the world, we are extracting groundwater for economic and societal purposes. And now we are facing this decline of the subsurface, but also the salination of the groundwater, fresh groundwater supplies. And by next generation modeling, we can use parallel supercomputer Snellius. We can combine all these global data from the hydro-geo resources. And this it makes this data available on a much higher systematic scale. And just like operating global storm surge models and river discharge models, we are also operate a high resolution global groundwater model to assess drafts, salinity, subsidence of the soil, water quality, heat and transboundary aquifer issues, and we are able to link them to the SDGs. Next, please. Very important is that the data, and this is really a mind-blowing development, that we are able to look ahead and that we are able to predict with data and modeling what's going on. And 100 years from now, it looks a bit, well, not the humility part of the idea that we are able to look 100 years ahead. But at the same time, this is a very important exercise. We found out in the Netherlands that looking ahead 30 years compared to look ahead 100 years gives a different, completely different perspectives on the perspective of the development in our delta area. And that the measures that are sufficient for the developments over 30 years are completely insufficient when we go through some more severe climate change developments in the longer run. And we all are aware that taking measures takes a long time, especially when you are taking measures in close interaction with society. So climate change is accelerating, and taking measures takes time. So we're running out of time. We're in this time squeeze. And it's extremely important for adaptive delta management to become aware of what we have to prepare for. Next, please. At Deltaris, we developed a Blue Earth. And this is because we are convinced that informed and interactive decision-making is very important within the field of water-related planning processes. And due to increased complexity of the system and what are the stress factors on the system from the perspective of economic use, but also from climate change, we need the best basis for decision making and stakeholder engagement that is available. And this is where our ambition comes in, to bring in our global experience that we need to have a combination of structured and analytical planning framework on the one hand, robust stakeholder engagement on the other hand, and fueling this process with the best data, tools, and decision support facilities that are available. And that's why we try to open up in an open data and open source platform everything we have available for everyone in a data community-based open platform. Next, please. Blue Earth's ultimate goal is to enable informed and interactive decision making. And I stress interactive because, as I was introduced, diversity and inclusion has always had my special interest. Being 3 out of 300 students in college were female, I have to overcome a lot of exclusion myself. But bringing inclusion into the heart of all our projects is where it all comes about. It's not only about our organizations of the way we work, but it's really how we incorporate the stakeholder engagement in the core of our processes. The outer circle represents the interactive processes of stakeholder engagement, and all the green spots are steps that you have to make in this process in a structured way. And the core of this Blue Earth is a digital environment to support stakeholder engagement processes with evidence-based information. So it consists of 3 components: the co-creation, to support the collaboration with stakeholders, because this is vital that the scientific information or the modeling part of our knowledge base is not accessible and cannot be used for stakeholder engagement. It's simply too complex and not tailored to the questions that people, stakeholders, tend to ask. So it is a co-creation layer which translates the Blue Earth engine, which is quickly build, run, and analyze hydrological models, and the Blue Earth data, which is in the core. And it consists of open access model in inputs and outputs of data sets. And we really believe that decision-making is most effective when you combine the best insights with the best engagement. So the injection of modeling data into stakeholder-driven planning processes often requires additional interfaces. I'd like to stress that again. We developed therefore dashboards with solutions and interactive applications, which fuels co-creation processes, and that people themselves get involved in the what-if scenarios that they need to develop. And this visualization of what happens really doesn't only enriches decision-making processes, but it also builds up on awareness of the invisible resources that we want to make visible. In the next slide, you see the portal. And of course, we are building this up. So the data sets include now many climate, geographical, and water-related parameters like precipitation, air temperature, topography, storm surge, river discharge, tidal currents. And this can be used for both historical observations, but also for future scenarios. At current, there are still limited dynamic data sets available, but we will create access in the coming months to much more. And later on, my colleague Daniel Twite will give a demonstration of this Blue Earth data portal during the second part of the session today. So I think if you're interested, please take a look, and also give us feedback if you think that things may be improved. This brings me to my main takeaways on the next slide, please. something's going on, as was already said in the introduction. We cannot simply, we have to speed up in bridging the gap between knowing that something is going on and adapting ourselves and our delta areas to what's going on. And I think on us is the responsibility to use the data and modeling and technologies and tools that are available to contribute to sustainability and equality around the world. Openness and transparency and sharing knowledge, please let not compete with knowledge on such an important thing like sustainable development. We're in this ship of planet Earth together, and there's no place for competition when it comes to data and modeling. So we need to work together, and we are more than willing to do so. And I invite you to all to build the bridge to us and create interaction which makes our work more available. I'm grateful being born and raised in the family I was. I'm one of the privileged ones, and I feel this deep conviction and dedication to contribute to sustainable delta areas around the world. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Ms. Nijhof. This was very, very inspiring. You reminded us that we need the humility to know or to act, to leave the earth as we found it, and the data and the tools to look ahead in future, modeling tools and data at our fingertips, and knowledge sharing without competing, without being stingy about it, so we can foresee the future 100 years and act on it. And it's up to us, the planners, the scientists. Yes, I'm also an engineer, and I remember when I visited Netherlands, everything was 1 in 100 years. And I joke that in the part of the world I work in, we even do 1 in 2 years or 1 in 5 years because of that lack of data and resources. Thank you very much. Please do type in your questions that you may have for Ms. Nijhof on the chat box. I would like to now invite our Director General of the Sustainable Development and Climate Change Department, Mr. Bruno Carrasco, to share his thoughts on valuing water through technological innovations. DG Carrasco leads ADB-wide knowledge, innovation, policies, and strategies in all thematic and sector operation areas, and ensures compliance with environment and safeguard policies of ADB. He joined ADB 23 years ago and has served in countries across all its regional departments. He holds a doctorate degree in economics from University of Essex. Over to you, DG Bruno.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Neeta. Dear Annemieke, colleagues and participants, a very happy World Water Day to all of you. I'm delighted to join you on this special day, and very pleased to see so many of our ADB colleagues and even outside partners at this event. Water is essential for our survival. It's fundamental to sustain economic activity, critical to safeguard the environment, and of course needed to improve the quality of people's lives. From Annemiek's presentation, we have seen the takeaways by way of the sinking, shrinking deltas, and getting saltier. Now, water is the primary medium through which we will observe the effects of climate change, and that's an important consideration. And therefore, water solutions are also mostly climate solutions. The Asia and the Pacific region is the most disaster-affected region in the world. Unfortunately, it is also the region that experiences more than 40% of the globe's climate change-related calamities. And it also hosts about 84% of the people affected by them. At the Asian Development Bank, we have been tracking the status across 5 key dimensions of water security of our region's 49 member countries. Though we have seen gradual progress in the last few years, 22 countries out of the 49 still remain water insecure, representing over 2 billion people, or about 50% of the region's population. These make it all the more compelling for us to focus on managing water, not only for the economic and social growth, but also for us to adapt to climate change. Now, the recent experience of dealing with COVID-19 and the effects has made it apparent that digitalization is a must to become resilient. Very important lesson. Adoption of digitalization has also become an essential tool to spearhead water efficiency and coverage improvement. We are also seeing a growing number of solution providers and evidence of success of digitalization technologies to help improve efficiency of water services and increase resilience of communities. Many established companies and startups based in emerging economies are now investing in and developing digital solutions that are not only cheaper, but also appropriate for our regional context. We also see that digitalization has increased entry points for private sector and opportunities to mobilize private financing, as well as improve governance in the water sector. Let me share here an example. In Dili, Timor-Leste, it was estimated that it took customers an average of 4 hours to pay each water bill. Because none of the water service providers' processes were automated and were completely paper-based, customers had to collect their paper bills at the water office, travel to the bank to pay their bills, and then return to the water office to present the receipts. As you can well imagine, the water service providers' collection efficiency ratio was very low. Now, digital systems where customers can access their bills online or through SMS, combined with digital payment systems, can reduce this process to just a couple of minutes. And what we have found out is that the constraint and slowness in adopting technologies in many cases is not due to resources, but really lack of awareness and even apprehension on where to start and how to sustain digitalization, especially when the starting point or the baseline is very low. What many may consider basic for a water service provider or irrigation or water resource manager, such as a database of its assets and customers, digital billing, monitoring tools for quality and quantity of water, or simply warning systems, are still not available to many of our clients. Therefore, demystifying these technological advances for our clients and connecting the solution providers and clients has been the focus of our work in recent times. That is why we hosted e-marketplaces and are starting the interactive annual e-magazines, the Digitalizing Water, to help our developing member countries digitalize for water security and resilience across Asia and the Pacific. The recent pandemic has given us greater impetus to push towards adopting digital ICT and space technology. Let's now build on this momentum and experience how digital water solutions can make a difference. I again congratulate Neeta and her team on this wonderful publication and wish all of you again a happy World Water Day. We look forward to seeing more success stories and uptake of digitalization as an important tool to value water and increase water security and resilience of our region. Thank you very much.
Thank you, DG Bruno. With this, we take your permission to launch our e-magazine that you talked about. It is the first of our annual interactive e-magazines where we would like to showcase the solutions, lessons, and as you said, demystify. We like this word, demystifying, for both sides. So we would like to do the ribbon cutting and a short unveiling of it. Over to you, Gino.
We live in a world that's fast running out of water. In Asia and the Pacific alone, 500 million people still don't have access to basic water supply, and over 1 billion lack access to safe sanitation. In order to achieve SDG 6 by 2030, we have no choice but to bypass old methods to get there faster, for a more water-secure and resilient Asia and the Pacific. That's why accelerating digitalization is central to increasing our region's water security and resilience. Introducing Digitalizing H2O, an annual interactive e-magazine published by the Asian Development Bank. In our inaugural issue, Digitalizing for Water Security and Resilience in Asia and the Pacific, Digitalizing H2O, showcases solutions and lessons from ADB's e-marketplaces on water security and resilience. Digitalizing H2O also features 12 ADB projects with in-depth information on the innovative tools they used on the field. Learn to harness technology to achieve our goal of bringing water for all. Download Digitalizing H2O today.
Thank you. With this very short marketing, we do encourage you, it is an interactive e-magazine. You can click on the icons of 118 solution providers. I think Deltaris was one of them and many other partners from the Netherlands, solution providers, and what they presented, including the videos or the interactive discussions, are all on the portal. So do take time to please go and visit. It also has interviews from our clients, what the clients face, and ADB staff also. So with this, we would like to move on to the second part of our presentations. Ms. Silvia Cardascia, who is our Water Resources Specialist in ADB's East Asia Department, who joined ADB in 2018. And prior to joining ADB, she worked in University of Oxford, Italian Aid Agency of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in Addis Ababa, among others. She will present to us the story of the invisible, how the invisible is being made visible in Beijing. Over to you, Ms. Cardascia.
Thank you, Neeta. Hi, everyone. And today I'll take you on a journey to Beijing and talk about why groundwater is so important for advancing its water security. Next slide, please. So it may come to you as a surprise, but Beijing is one of the most water scarce cities in the world, with less than 100 cubic meters per capita of water a year. This is a scarce resource that has been shared among 21.5 million people, and it's feeding an economy that has grown almost tenfold in the last decade. About 55% of Beijing's water supply, so more than a half, is groundwater from its aquifers, with the remaining 0.5% coming from surface water. Groundwater aquifers are typically located in soils or deeper rock layers beneath the surface. Next one. So groundwater is a critical resource globally, as Neeta and others have noted, and this is true especially in semi-arid regions. Groundwater accounts for about 26% of global water withdrawals and about 40% of irrigation water consumption. However, overexploitation of groundwater has brought a range of environmental and ecological consequences, which include rivers running dry, land subsidence, and vegetation degradation. It also increases the risks of depleting Beijing's emergency water supply. And all these impacts, of course, are being exacerbated by extreme events, such as the droughts that have occurred in the past 5 years in the city, and also climate change, among others. Beijing is not the only one in the world facing these problems, as we all know, and similar issues can be observed in other regions that are represented here on the slide. These are, for instance, the North China Plain, the Indus Basin, and the Arabian Aquifer. These impacts are also quite evident in Jakarta, where unsafe levels of groundwater extraction have sunk the city of Jakarta by about 2.5 meters in the past 10 years. And as you may know, forcing the government to announce a plan to relocate the capital city. So if you look at the graph below, the decreasing groundwater level depth are also corresponding to, of course, decreasing of annual precipitation, especially in the past 30 years. And over-extraction to meet the demand of household irrigation and industrial uses sent the groundwater level really down significantly. Next, please. So in order to tackle this urgent problem, which is threatening not only the capital region in the People's Republic of China, but also other cities in the drier north of China, the government has put forward one of the largest human engineering projects to redistribute water resources. This is called South to North Water Diversion. And it is a massive infrastructure project which started in 2002. And the central section of it, as you can see, conveys water from the southern China to Beijing Plain to the north through a long canal system of more than 1,000 kilometers, which has been operating since December 2014. So as a result, Beijing has received additionally 5.2 billion cubic meters of water. And this has also contributed to leveling up the groundwater table of about 3 meters in the observed period of 3 years. Next one, please. So managed aquifer recharge is part of a comprehensive Beijing capital region water conservation strategies, which have been designed to reduce water stress and improve water conservation measures. While plenty of research findings support the availability of technology to face water scarcity, especially during dry season, acting also as a buffer to mitigate drought impacts and also adaptation measure against climate change, actually implementation on a large scale worldwide is still quite rare. And this is due to shortcoming deriving from lack of financial incentives or adequate regulatory frameworks, risks of contamination from untreated sources, and also massive infrastructure costs and difficulty to monitor large-scale projects. Next one. So here I would like to show you sort of the ingredients to make groundwater managed recharge successful. This comes from a combination of at least 3 different sets of elements. As Neeta also mentioned before, and our DG as well, adequate institutional framework is very important. Such a framework has to address not only technological design and technical design, but also other crucial elements such as regulatory and policy dimensions, social and environmental safeguards, and economic incentives to create an enabling environment for bankable projects. The second ingredient is technical capacity, of course, to operate and maintain the infrastructure, and also to collect data and regularly monitoring them. It also takes investment in research and innovation to test different approaches, make sure that the water infiltrating the ground is of good quality and so it's not contaminated, and also looking at different recharge methods, conduct trials to measure how groundwater levels change with recharge and pumping. So ultimately, a sound management plan is crucial for successfully managing recharge of aquifers. A good plan and also strict enforcement ensure that investment will not only see water disappearing into the aquifer, but also coming back with greater value at the time needed. So the experimental recharge in Beijing that has been going for several years right now, the results of it are promising. It shows that storing water underground is technically and financially feasible. And in addition to environmental benefits, recovering groundwater levels has also shown to be more cost-effective compared with other surface water storage options. However, I want to highlight that it is important to combine recharge, which is a supply-side measure, with other water demand options, which are demand-driven. This includes, for instance, improved management of surface water through water savings, recycling, and reuse, among others. So this being said, the invisible storage with managed aquifer recharge remains a very effective measure for Beijing and probably for many other regions in the world who are equally facing water scarcity. This concludes my presentation, and thank you very much, Neeta. Over to you, and thanks for inviting me.
Thank you, Silvia. Excellent presentation, and a reminder that if you make a sound plan and have a commitment to resource it, this example of how Beijing has managed aquifer recharge through the sound plan implementation is a reminder that many of our member countries that it's doable, because it just feels like bigger than Ben-Hur when people look at how to make invisible visible and take care of it. We see lots of questions on the chat box. I just encourage you to keep sending them. We will come around to them very soon. We just have a last presentation from another ADB colleague, Mr. Jelle Beekma, who's Senior Water Resources Specialist in ADB Sustainable Development and Climate Change Department. Mr. Beekma is a hydrologist and agricultural engineer with over 30 years of consulting, research, and teaching experience covering a wide range of water subsectors, irrigation, agricultural drainage, river basin management, and also in policy and institutional reforms. Over to you, Mr. Beekma.
Thank you very much, Neeta, and thank you for inviting me. It's really a pleasure to be here, and happy Water Day to everybody. I'm mainly looking at the visible, but there are a few invisibles as well. I will give you some glimpses of the initiatives of the water sector using digitalization for better water management. The water sector in ADB is that in this case. I first start with Pakistan canal optimization in a system that's already existing. Then I go to a greenfield irrigation, where irrigation scheduling can be done much better. And thirdly, I mention a few new approaches that we have these days and that are important in spreading digitization much easier and much further. We already heard Annemieke, for example, mentioning the open source, which I think is very important. Then I quickly look at a study that we do where we use artificial intelligence for advancing the water, energy, and food nexus. What I also wanted to mention is that a tool was developed, a screening tool for energy evaluation of projects. I was a bit too late aware of that, otherwise I would have included it. But I would encourage anybody to ask Stefan Besadi for more on this. Next one, please. Pakistan, we have a system for protective irrigation. That means that you distribute the water as evenly as possible over a large area, but there's actually too little water. And there comes a link here with the invisible. If you don't have enough surface water, then quite often there's pumping of groundwater. And if you pump the groundwater too long, then there's salinity upconing and you get saline water on your fields. So there's quite a risk if there's not good equality in the distribution of water. We've done studies here on evapotranspiration, and on the right bottom side, we did that with Earth observations. On the right bottom side, you see the distribution of water over a number of different canals. In purple, you see where there was a lot of water that was being given, a bit more than average. And on yellow and red, you see much less water. And you see that there's quite a bit that can be changed. And I'm very glad to say that the Punjab Irrigation Department is picking this up and making this, integrating this for the whole Punjab to do better canal distribution, water distribution. Next slide, please. As I said, this was an existing system, a brownfield. Here we'll talk about the greenfield, Madhya Pradesh Irrigation Improvement Project. And a dam will provide water to a distribution chamber, which goes to different levels of pipes. And everywhere you see that there is a supervisory control and data acquisition, the SCADA, so famous. So we have a system where there's a lot of information. Now we take this one step further. Next slide, please. And again, using Earth observations, we look at the evapotranspiration in the field and we see how much water is being evapotranspirated, but how much water is also left in the field. And if you look at the left side, you see in red those fields that would need irrigation immediately on the 30th of January. And these maps are being provided through mobile phones to farmers. So the farmers in these red fields, they know they need to irrigate. We go even a bit further than that. To the right-hand side, you see how much water should be irrigated the next day. And in blue, you see where the most water is needed, in yellow, where a bit less water is needed, and green, where even less water is needed. The red fields don't have to be irrigated. What I like very much of this is that it shows a bit of a success story. Neeta has just published a blog on that, where you align with wider changes. You focus on the most vulnerable, the farmers. The wider changes are this new system. And you need some champions. And coincidentally, the operator became a big champion over here. They took up this system and they see the use of it. We piloted it and we saw that in this PILWAS demonstration farm, and we saw that it's actually a very good system that gives the farmer valuable information, and we use exactly enough water. The next one, please, is more about the developments that we have. You saw already Earth observation, remote sensing advances. We have better scale, we have better calculations. Citizen science and open source, a little bit already mentioned also by Annemieke. I think that's a very important thing, that we can get the data. We also have much better distributed systems where we can get data from different providers, and we don't have a prescribed format anymore, as long as it is well organized. And of course, artificial intelligence is being used more and more. And my next slide gives a quick example of what we're doing with that. On the left bottom side, you see, for some of us who have seen this kind of observation optimizations already, in blue dots, the optimum of low resilience and lowest cost points. These come from numbers and numbers of simulations, and you have to do many. But with artificial intelligence, we can very quickly identify those best solutions. If we go to the right, you see a graph where you have crossing lines that even gives more information if you use more dimensions. And the next one, here next slide, please. Here we used only 2 objectives, but here we have 5 objectives, and we can go to many more actually, depending on what stakeholders want. A, B, C, D, and E give here a number of objectives, and the lines show how different solutions perform. And they're optimal for certain values, for example, for A, for B, or for C. If we then zoom in to the blue and the red line that you see in the next graph, you can start, those are 2 that are a bit in the average range. So they're performing well in almost all of the metrics. Then if we look at the blue one, we see that sometimes it performs better, where we have green arrows, and sometimes it performs a bit worse than the red one, where we have black arrows. So with these graphs, we can then go to the stakeholders, discuss what is acceptable as a loss and what is really needed as a gain. Now we're planning to use this with many, many more metrics than the ABCD, more than Z, in a river basin, the Aral Basin, and to see how we can optimize the best for what stakeholders want and for a number of metrics that we use. I'd be very glad to answer any questions that you might have. And I think in the next one, that's the end of my presentation. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jelle, for also keeping with time. We look forward to seeing how this study using AI works out in the Aral Sea Basin and many more similar cases. So we've got lots of questions. If I can please invite Ms. Nijhof to begin with, because I think they're majority for her. Just to summarize, lots of interest on your Blue Earth system. How is it open source? And also in general, how do we get in touch? How do we access and how do we cooperate based on use of some of the data through the Blue Earth system? Over to you if you could share a bit more thought on that. Thank you.
Yes, thank you so much. Also, thank you for the questions. I already started to answer them typing, but Let me just pick out a few of them. First, the most simple one, if you just type in on your engine, your internet engine, Blue Earth, you will portal, you will immediately arrive at the site which gives you access to the Blue Earth data availability and portal. So that's, I just checked if it worked, but for me, it's quite easy to get access to that. And what is exactly in the machine and engine to make the prediction? It was one of the questions. I would suggest that you ask more in detail about how it works in the predictive part of the Blue Earth modeling to Daniel Twite later on in this session, because he's the specialist, and I won't offend him by giving a slightly not completely correct answer to that. So I think one of the was a question about the importance of water diplomacy when it comes to the future scenarios of delta areas, and I fully agree that if you look to the approach of Blue Earth, it's just like if there is a sort of neutral area in which we just simply can put forward the scientific or applied science on integrated water resource management and the data available and the predictions of what might happen on the one hand, and then start stakeholder engagement and end up with the best policy that's possible. And of course, we know that there is something like the power imbalance and the way that decision making is influenced throughout delta areas by policy or the already stakeholders that have big interests at stake, and that you simply have the political or economic position to buy in. So I fully agree that it is at the same time, and that's also the power of putting things, making the invisible visible, is that we have to advocate the importance of the common value of water, and that it's not per se that the way we historically gave access to our groundwater resources is also the recipe for the future. I think this is also, when I look through the Netherlands or other delta areas, this is a big issue. So water diplomacy is key when it comes to being prepared for climate change. And then last but not least, I was triggered by the question on how to make our water sector more inclusive and diverse. And this is, I wish I had a simple answer. I've been working on this and fighting for this for more than 30 years. But I think it's a very good, there are fast developments, and it's a mixture of measures. It's about the conviction at the top. We need more leaders who are explicitly working on this, and not only by stories, but by deeds and by the decisions they make, and prove that they're really serious for the benefit of everyone and anything. I think it should be part of our guidelines and standards. Just make it the normal common practice that this is top of mind. And start as early as possible in raising our kids with this awareness, and teach them during their engineering education. When I was educated as an engineer, I haven't ever learned anything about this. I was just completely focusing on my mind level and my brains. And I really had to teach myself becoming the whole person again, with a soul and with a heart, and with this empathy, this humanity and humility I put on my sheets after that. So why not putting this up front in our education of our professionals and specialists? Becoming excellent in one field of expertise doesn't mean that you have to skip your being a human being, which is starting in everything we do from the perspective of diversity and inclusion. That would be my dream.
Thank you very much, Ms. Nijhof. I share your dream. I have also for over 25 years been generally the only woman around the table wherever I go, starting from construction many years ago. May I quickly invite DG Bruno to share any last thoughts he had on listening to today's discussions and presentations, if you're still here with us? He might be having issues with his mic. We have very little time. Before I hand over to the chair of our sector committee, water sector committee in ADB, Mr. Tom Panella, to give his closing remarks and close, we would just like to take half a minute to show you a video of an initiative we have started called Are You Water Resilient? It's an initiative that is there to support the ground level water entities, be it irrigation managers, water resource managers, urban or rural water entities, in becoming resilient. And digitalization, access to data, and plans towards climate adaptation are key pillars of it. Over to you, Gino, to show the video. Thank you. Thank you, Gino. Now I would like to invite the chair of our water sector committee, Mr. Tom Panella, to share his remarks and also close today's events. Mr. Panella is also the director of our Environment, Natural Resources and Agriculture Division in East Asia Department. He served as ADB's Chief of Water Sector Group from 2017 to 2020, my predecessor, and was also the Afghanistan country director from 2014 to 17. He has led water operations in Central, South, Southeast Asia, and has a PhD from the University of California, Berkeley. Over to you, Tom. And from me, thank you very much again for joining us today.
Thank you very much, Neeta. And also I would like to thank all of our presenters today for really fascinating and excellent food for discussion, as well as the participants. ADB is really highly engaged in the digitalization, as we've seen with the e-magazine, but also with projects that are all highlighted in the project or in the e-magazine. And traditionally, this we're thinking of this as an urban water supply sanitation type of approach with smart meters replacing conventional meters. But I think today we've seen how this digitalization and technology are affecting other parts of the water sector, including water resources management for irrigation, for managed aquifer recharge, and a host of other activities going on. And those of us working in the water sector as well are aware that this is accelerating significantly, not only from COVID, but just due to the development of technology and IT that can be used in the water space. Now, I think today, though, there were a couple of very important things that were brought out. The first, I'd like to really pick up on Annemieke's comment about the purpose of us doing this can't be lost in the digitalization, that really we have to focus on inclusivity and equity as outcomes, and those should be paramount in how we go about pursuing this. I think some of the other key points were, while we talked about digitalization, it's quite clear in and of itself that it's not a panacea. It can do many things to improve efficiency, service delivery, but as we see in terms of Silvia's presentation, and also very much in the blue the presentation, the tool from Deltaris, that we see that it's really embedded into larger processes that involve stakeholder engagement, policy development, and overall improved management. Now, this is an area that ADB has traditionally been involved with, and where I see digitalization can complement these efforts. And I think importantly, in terms of transparency, people talked about open source, as well as stakeholder engagement. Now, while digitalization can also improve efficiency and service delivery, it can provide information, scenario building, a whole host of things to engage those who benefit from water and its effective management. And I think this needs to be part of how we take this forward. Digitalization is great, it can improve things, but it's only one part of a broader approach to the water sector that must be underpinned by inclusivity, equity, and transparency. And by supporting these principles along with our projects and the technology, we can arrive at sustainable outcomes using this improved technology, yet at the same time strengthening the institutions and the policy and the management frameworks under which our clients are trying to address the vast challenges of the region. So while it's easy to get caught up, I think, in looking at the models, we need to think about how are we going to use them and what good can we bring into the world with this, not only for ourselves, but for our future generations. And I'd like to thank everybody again for their participation today. And this is a very inspiring and uplifting session that I think gives us lots of optimism moving forward. Thank you again. And with that, we'll close the session. And for those of you whose questions we didn't get to, we will try to respond to you by email. And again, a happy World Water Day to everybody, making the invisible visible.